Hello, everyone, and welcome to our recording on transnational networks of by Keck and Margaret Keck, or I should say by Margaret Keck and Catherine Sikkink. Um, this week in particular is an interesting week because it's a different way to look at international relations from a point of transnationalism. Let me just tell you the difference between transnationalism and internationalism. Internationalism refers to the interactions between and among states. So really state to state, okay? Um, Transnationalism refers to interactions among states and non-state actors to create forms of what we call global governance. And let me give you an example. In Keck and Sikkink's reading on the human rights norms cascade, you notice that they're referring to the implementation of human rights from the Declaration of Human Rights after World War II all the way through their writing in the 1990s and their book Activists Beyond Borders, which was published in 1998. But what they're referring to is that these state and non-state actors and intergovernmental organizations have had the ability to leverage, particularly non-governmental organizations have had the ability to leverage information and ideas to create implementation of norms through networks, through transnational advocacy networks. And that's what I'm going to explain to you today. So this is a really different look at international relations from the point of view of liberal institutionalism a la Cohen and Nye, or more realist approaches which are very state-bounded, referring to state power and power poles like John Mearsheimer's look at the end of the Cold War. Even Emanuel Wallerstein refers to a system, but that system is very much state-bounded and obviously more Marxist in analysis. So Keck and Sikkink, this was one of the works that really pushed international relations forward. So it is one of the top international relations works in the past 20 years, particularly Catherine Sikkink is one of the most highly regarded women in the field of international relations and ranks in the top 3 most influential scholars in international relations of all time by Foreign Policy Journal. So this is one of those heavyweight readings. I will also say a lot of my work previously and even continuing somewhat today is in line with transnational networks of indigenous peoples that counter oil extraction in the Amazon. So I'm quite familiar with this work in particular. Aside from that, this work is very different than what Clifford Bob, a more realist approach to non-governmental organizations and their transnational networks from last week that Alton brilliantly presented. This is a very different type of analysis of non-governmental organizations because they assume they are idea-generating, principled advocacy networks. So that's a very different take, and I just want to point that out. So what Keck and Sikkink argue is that norms and ideas have a role in the international system. The concept that rights for humans should be protected, that bodily harm, grave danger to civilians is something that we should not promote on the planet, and that there have been transnational advocacy networks from the time of female foot binding in their book, which you of course didn't read, you just read a chapter out of the book, but in their book Activists Beyond Borders, published in 1998, they argue that there are precedents for transnational advocacy networks such as anti-female foot binding in China and Japan, the anti-apartheid movement, and also the anti-slavery movement in the 1800s. So there have been transnational networks that we have analyzed, we know of historically. Even the civil rights movement in the U.S. was connected with the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa in the 80s and 90s. The difference, they argue, is the strength and the ability of these networks to leverage their information and knowledge and change policy outcomes with states. And that is what they say is a real leap forward for humanity, that we have found a way as civilians, non-state actors, to protect the rights within states. And so we have seen transnational campaigns like the anti-WTO World Trade Organization protests in Seattle in 1999 totally took the world by storm and really off guard. The state of Washington was not expecting that thousands of anti-WTO protesters would descend upon Seattle in 1999. In fact, it was dubbed the Battle of Seattle. And this in particular campaign I'm going to talk about, you see there two people and their child, Manuel and Eva Maria Gutierrez, and it says they're secuestrados, which means they were kidnapped. 4-9, which is really 4 is the month, so 9, and you see that 72 there, 1972. These women were the Madres de la Plaza, the Mothers of the Plaza in Argentina, and Margaret Keck and Keck and Sikkink write about this in this book. But Keck and Sikkink has experience in Argentina, has studied Argentinian politics and human rights for a number of years, and so this is an Amazonian oil extraction, anti-oil extraction picture, one of mine. So let me just skip for a moment to a slide that I have here to explain it, and then I'll go back. What Keck and Sikkink found with the case of Argentina, so we'll use A, the state of Argentina, in this slide, and I'll just hover around it so you can see what I'm referring to. A, the state of Argentina, and we'll say B is the state of the United States. So when there are local people, okay, that have organized, like the Mothers of the Plaza in Argentina. Many times in our previous state-bounded studies of international relations, these people who were protesting the kidnapping of their children in the plaza had no way of telling the world what was happening because their state was blocking this information. Remember, in the 60s and 70s, the United States, this was the Cold War. We were very supportive of the military dictatorship in Argentina. And so these NGOs that were protesting the military dictatorship installed in Argentina didn't have a voice, except for when people from NGOs outside of Argentina went to Argentina and they wondered, what are these poor grandmothers doing in the plaza protesting, and they heard their story. They were horrified. So it was U.S. NGOs that mobilized and shared information with the NGOs from Argentina. And what these U.S. NGOs, non-governmental organizations, said, they said, no, we're going to tell our Congress people, this can't happen. You can't have thousands of people, because they may or may not be socialists, being kidnapped. And then we later come to find out were also tortured. And so these NGOs from the U.S. received information, pictures, documentation, photographs, and they even brought some of the grandmothers that were protesting in the Plaza of Argentina to Washington, D.C., okay, country B, state B, to tell Congress people that this can't happen. We need to support the human rights of these people who are being kidnapped. And so there was so much pressure on the U.S. government that, in fact, the president at the time, President Carter, he contacted the Argentinian government and said, look, this can't be. We can't have this type of treatment of human beings. And he placed pressure through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on Argentina. When they didn't listen, he went to the United Nations, the UN Security Council, which supported sanctions against Argentina, pressured Argentina. And so from both sides, the U.S. not trading with Argentina, and then the United Nations countries placing sanctions on Argentina, it created a policy outcome that eventually the Argentinian military dictatorship folded, and a truth commission was created to find out what happened to the lives of these thousands of people that were abducted in their homes by the military regime that was trying to stop any type of socialist organization. And so this is one story of what Keck and Sikkink call the boomerang effect, because rather than these actors going directly to their state, they circumvent their state and they go around it to other NGOs who help them act against the state in a boomerang pattern. In subsequent work, in fact, in my subsequent work, going back to the picture on the Amazon, I found that through these boomerang patterns in the 1990s, there really was a norms cascade that occurred, and it strengthened the local non-governmental organizations, such as the indigenous organizations all throughout South America. And in fact, it's not that there was no transnational organization or transnational networks, but rather than having the northern NGOs speak on behalf of the southern NGOs, meaning the NGOs in the lesser developed world, these NGOs were working in tandem with NGOs from around the world to represent their own causes. This was a real step forward in what we call the boomerang pattern that Keck and Sikkink have implemented. And so this interesting pattern has caused some interesting effects, okay? What Sikkink calls the norms cascade, right? That human rights now has been not only internalized at the UN or global level, but that states understand now that this has to be internalized on a domestic level. And so what transnational advocacy networks do is they create structures and patterns of interaction, and they have agency, meaning action. They do something, they create policy outcomes. In this case, the policy outcome was the protection of human rights of people in Argentina and the toppling of a military dictatorship towards a more democratic regime. And here again, what transnational advocacy networks do is they challenge the concept of state-to-state interaction or the rational actor self-interest towards a view of international relations that promotes principled ideas and norms that are implemented not only by states and institutions like non-governmental organizations or intergovernmental organizations, but also by individuals that advocate for policy change. This is a really interesting improvement, or should I say innovation, in international relations theory, because in the advent of the Arab Spring, in which Facebook and Google took such primary roles in Twitter, as social media has created all new types of digital networks. In the early 90s, when Keck and Sikkink were writing this, they couldn't have anticipated the robustness of the ability to network via digital media. But in today's world, many people now look at the transnational advocacy networks of these campaigns and the impact on policy because of the enhanced tool of digital communication and ease of media flow. And so you'll even look at the US State Department promoting media and youth projects in countries that they'd like to advocate for democratic change. And so this look at international relations as flows of advocacy works has really created a push in the theory towards a more constructivist approach or enhancing liberal institutionalism. Okay, thanks very much for listening.